Welcome to Town Square. My name is Lynn Corum. I'll be your host today. And today my guests are Meredith England, Howard Schaefer, and Milt Eaton. And we had one discussion about Vermont Yankee and nuclear power in general and trying to flush out all the concerns and questions people might have. And this is our continuation of that effort. Let's go on to talking about the legal relationship that Vermont Yankee has with Vermont. I know there's the terms tossed around are federal preemption, contract violations, the memorandum of understanding, and so on and so forth. So again, what's going on here?
Well, I blog about this a fair amount, but that doesn't make me really an expert. That makes me a blogger.
More so than us.
But basically, in 2002, the Entergy purchased Vermont Yankee from a consortium of utilities that owned it. And this was, the purchase agreement was the memorandum of understanding, which is really a contract. When you get governments involved in things, they often call contracts memorandum of understandings that several agencies or something have to be involved in it. So in this memorandum of understanding, it said that the plant would be operated by Entergy between 2002 and 2012, and that after 2012, the plant might continue to operate, assuming that it could have a license renewal by the NRC, which every plant has to have to operate past its 4 years license, plus a certificate of public good by the Public Service Board.
And what are the criteria for this? The NRC has already given its approval.
No, it hasn't, but everybody expects it to do so because the plant has always been highly rated. Public service boards, as a group, regulate utilities. That's what they do. They get up in the morning and regulate utilities, and then the next day they regulate them some more. So they have a criteria for what can get a certificate of public good, and that generally means it's operated safely, it's operated with reliably, it has a good, it sells power at a reasonable cost, and it supplies that power reliably. And so their criteria are very much, is this a good plant for Vermont? Now, since the NRC regulates safety, the Public Service Board would not regulate
Now, when you started that sentence, you said they look at it.
They do
safe.
for other kinds of plants.
For other kinds of plants.
But the NRC regulates the safety of nuclear plants.
Okay. Okay, so that is not within
that's not
their
within their purview.
at this point.
But they get up, as I say, and they regulate electricity supplies for the state of Vermont and give certificate of public good to in-state power plants of various sorts.
And what we can expect from the Public Service Board?
Let's put it this way. 4 years later, after the document was signed, the legislature passed an act which says the Public Service Board cannot release its findings unless we give it permission to do so. So they couldn't actually make the Public Service Board say the plant isn't any good. That would be incredibly difficult for the legislature to do. What they said was, you can say it's good, but we won't let you tell anybody unless we authorize you to release its findings.
But that was 4 years later. So basically the state the legislature has chosen to ignore a memorandum of understanding, a contract that was signed earlier, right?
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that there are a lot of precedents that say states cannot change contracts just by a legislative vote. They can't change it.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned lawyers, some of the faculty at the Vermont Law School feel precisely that there's a good issue there, and this case is going to wind up in court.
Now,
The NRC will issue, they expect the NRC will issue a license saying, yes, the plant's safe. The legislature will have acted, and when it comes 2012, we'll wind up under some sort of a court stay, and the plant continuing to run while it battles its way through the federal court, as a couple of other issues involving nuclear power plants in this country have gotten all the way to the Supreme Court. And I think personally this is another case that's going to wind up right on the desk of the Supreme Court.
Okay, Milton, you have been in the state. Now, what is, we've also gone to the Supreme Court on our legislative restrictive what you can give during a campaign, and that got tossed out. And how much did that cost us? What's this going to cost to go to the courts?
It will cost the state millions. It will cost and add to the cost of our power, whatever the conclusion. So it's, as a Vermonter who loves this state, I've been frankly embarrassed by some of the Banana Republic actions that have come down from Montpelier, because serving in Montpelier was one of the honors of my life, and an agreement is reached, and an agreement should be kept, and that's been the basis of our country for years, and we have really felt badly that other countries didn't do that, and here's Vermont doing just what we don't want things to happen.
And when you worked for the state, what agency did you work for under whose administration?
I was under Governor Snelling, but I was the Secretary of Development and Community Affairs, so I had 7 different departments, tourism and business. And
so you know what impact will this uncertainty have on us being able to attract business, which we desperately need?
The uncertainty on us is devastating. Businessmen have to project and plan ahead. This means you need a certain amount of certainty. There's enough unknowns that you can't really plan for. But just this morning, I heard that they're having problems discussing people that are now trying to block a power line coming down from Canada through New Hampshire. And what they noted was that the Hydro-Quebec contract that is being talked about over there fluctuates with the price of natural gas power, which means there is no fixed price as we have had from Yankee. And the local co-ops are saying, but if it's too low, it'll put us out of business. So it's the only good thing that I saw about what I was hearing was it proves that Vermont is not alone in having these problems.
And when a group says who produces a small amount of electricity says if it's too low, it will put us out of business, and we say, well, we don't really want them to lose their wherewithal. However, it will preclude other people from coming in, which would probably be a greater number and probably benefit the economy of that state to a larger extent than trying to protect an inefficient little operation here. And that happens a lot, how we make these choices.
I think if you were going to the Public Service Board, you would expect the Public Service Board to have the interest of the consumers as its highest criteria.
And the whole state.
And the whole state as consumers. And so the Public Service Board would be more likely to give a certificate of public good to a low-cost provider, assuming that it was safe and reliable and all that sort of stuff, than to a high-cost provider. Now, there are reasons, and I used to work in geothermal, so and in renewable. There are reasons to force utilities to buy a certain amount of power from renewables at higher costs, so that we keep developing renewables. If we never put any in, they'll never get any better. And so there is a reason for that, but they cannot take the place of the low-cost providers. And I just was very interested in what you were saying about Hydro-Quebec, because I've been watching the grid yesterday. I don't know if anybody else has been watching the grid yesterday,
No, I didn't
but
watch
it was
the grid,
the Vermont Yankee sells power into the grid at $44 per megawatt hour. Usually the grid goes between $40 and $70 or $80 per megawatt hour. Yesterday in New York, the grid was above $1,000 per megawatt hour, and Vermont and Hydro-Quebec was supplying power at about $180 per megawatt hour.
Hydro-Quebec, 180?
Yeah,
Vermont Yankees at $44?
Well, yeah, that's because it was fluctuating with the grid, and yesterday was very cold, and people were turning on their space heaters, and people were turning on their humidifiers, and the grid was being stressed, and they were getting the most expensive power that they could get just to keep it going, and it was It was quite interesting. Anyway, I have my amusements, whatever.
Well, again, that's what I think what we started to talk about is the renewables, and at this point in the state, renewables sell for, I think, anywhere from 30 cents. This is back down to more the terms that we see on our
That's
power
right.
bills. 30 cents a kilowatt hour as opposed to Yankees at
4 cents.
4 cents.
Right.
But now let's explain how that works. My understanding, Yankees at 4, the grid people who run and manage the grid and then get it back to your house and so forth, tack another 4 cents on or something. But because we're paying 12 or 13 cents a kilowatt hour on our electric bills.
Oh, basically, there's a lot of, there are many, many factors in that. But basically, there's the suppliers, and in general, people are buying from the grid, and whatever the grid is, that's the what I was talking about. So it was 4 cents to $10 yesterday for the $1,000. 1,000 per megawatt would be $10 per kilowatt hour. Pretty interesting, isn't it? No,
$10, yes.
10
1,000,
cents.
yes, yes.
10 cents would be if it went up to 100. It went up to 1,000.
Yes, you're right, yeah.
An interesting fluctuation.
Yeah, interesting fluctuation. And but then that's the wholesale price. That's basically what the generator can expect to be paid by the grid. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then somebody has to get that power to your house. They have to be there to answer your phone call
And fix your line.
and fix your line and
yeah.
so forth. And they tack another 6 or 7 cents on routinely, and they do it quite legitimately because they're maintaining the little distribution network, on the power poles and the transformers, and they've got a lot of work to do for that 6 cents. But that means that if the grid was running 8 cents and they was tacking on 6 cents, you would get a 14-cent bill, which is
kind of what we pay.
right, exactly.
Okay. And the grid operators look for the cheapest power first. However, the legislature, I think, is dictating, at least in Vermont, New Hampshire,
Yes.
Detroit, that we buy a certain percentage of our power from the renewables, which they hope will support renewable development.
Right.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Let's
And you
talk
look at
about
it from
that.
a public policy point of view, not only for electric power, but throughout our history, the government has gotten into the business of subsidizing, encouraging, providing mechanisms for every technology that has come along, starting with the canals, and then there were the railroads, and on. And then, of course, there was a rural electric power administration to make sure we got power to the places where the private market.
That was kind of in the 20s, wasn't it?
Well, up through the 30s, and I think the last places in Vermont to get electric power were all the way into the 50s, weren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very end of the 40s.
Yeah,
Right.
and so this is across all technologies, and we still have it. For instance, who owns the airports? It's not the airlines. They're built by government agencies because the governments have decided this activity, this service, this technology is for the public good, and this is the mechanism that will help it go. And of course, we subsidize Amtrak and on. So when somebody raises an issue against nuclear power, oh, it's subsidized. Every technology is subsidized, particularly wind and solar.
Now, Milt, could you give us a little history on how nuclear has been subsidized
Well-
when it started until now? What's going
Well,
on now?
of course, nuclear really, the big push was defense, national security. So that the first laboratories out in Idaho were for nuclear power plants for the Navy. But the biggest subsidies today are in the form of guarantees because of our legal system and the tendency of everybody to sue for everything possible, and private industry being unable to really take on
That
open
liability?
Sesame liability. But I actually just last night I pulled up what federal subsidies are. Now this doesn't include state subsidies, and state subsidies we have three different things happening. For example, with our alternative energy, a demand that the utilities supply so much of their power from alternative energy, that we subsidize with extra payments, therefore extra cost to all of us, every kilowatt hour produced by alternative energy, and then tax the other. But the subsidies I thought were quite interesting. The lowest subsidy of all the energy sources is natural gas. That's 25 cents of a megawatt hour. Kilowatt hour, I guess, I'm sorry. But using the same unit of energy, solar power gets $24.34. Wind energy gets $23.37. Coal gets 44 cents. Natural gas gets 25 cents. And nuclear, they come up with $1.59. And I think that's a kilowatt.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
But we're still, those renewables have consumed, and we've spent billions
billions.
trying to improve this technology.
Synthetic Fuels Agency, which was part of the alternative energy programs at the end of the Ford, but mostly in the Carter administration, were $88 billion spent at that time. And $88 billion back then was a lot more money than $88 billion sounds today. But we have spent immense amounts of money.
Developing solar, developing wind, developing batteries, that kind of stuff.
Developing things to
Now-
make it economic.
Now Vermont still thinks that the state can make leaps and bounds above what the federal government has done, even though they've spent billions and brought it up this far. So we're still being basically taxed because we're being forced to buy this more expensive power. It's money out of our pockets to try to do what the federal government has only been able to get so far. Is that a fair statement?
No, I'm not. Actually, I don't think it's quite fair.
Okay.
The federal government has done the R&D. Now, Vermont's legislature is concerned with the next step, which is getting it into the marketplace. Just like TVs, just like computers. Once you need to develop the market to then expand the usage and drive the price down, as has happened with every technology. And so the legislature has said, we'll take a small amount of power and we'll require it be bought at these prices, which, yes, is a subsidy, yes, is paid for by everybody else, but we will protect the ratepayers by putting a cap on it. Because it's not all the power that wind can produce. It's the total amount for this feed-in tariff, is what it's called, is limited to 50 megawatts, I believe.
Right, 50 megawatts.
And the state normally has about 1,000 megawatt peak. So
Okay.
it's just a small chunk.
It's a small chunk now, but will it stay there?
Well, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I saw a blog post which said that it was describing what was coming down in the future, and they had some input from some legal firm that works a lot with the legislature. But this is one of the things they said was the idea would be that feed-in tariffs would be increased in the future. That's what the legislature wants to do, as long as it doesn't add more than 1% a year to people's power bills. So, but of course, in 10 years, then your power bills have gone up 10% because of the feed-in tariffs. Another thing that I really want to point out is that the legislature has been very effective at extracting money from Entergy. And one of the ways they did that was that when Entergy wanted to upgrade and have dry cask storage, they said, fine, but guess what? You'll get that from us, but you have to put a couple $1 million a year into what's called the Clean Energy Development Fund, the CEDF. That fund partially supports wind energy and solar energy. So it's Entergy money going into wind energy and solar energy. Well, you can imagine that the renewable people are, they don't want nuclear power, but then again, they don't exactly want the Clean Energy Development Fund to go away either, because that is
That's a major feed of that money.
It's a very major feed of that money. According to this blog post, which I didn't do the research for, but the legislature is considering adding $1.50 to $2 to everyone's power bill to feed the Clean Energy Development Fund if Vermont Yankee goes away. So the deal would be that we went through all this stuff about, well, here's how much the generator gets and here how much the distribution company gets. We also have another thing on our bills for Efficiency Vermont, and they would be adding on another thing called the Clean Energy Development Fund.
And that doesn't say anything about our power costs are going up in all those levels anyway.
No, that isn't.
I mean, so I'm just saying, our people could say, well, you're okay. I can afford $1 or $2 more a month to feed that, but your bill's going up across the board.
Yeah,
it's going to go up.
It's going to go up.
Cost of power are going up.
Right.
With the new contracts. Let's take a little segue here and talk about the future of nuclear. We have about 10 minutes left, and so what is it? I mean, maybe we can't talk about it, the future in this country, because we're trying to ignore this technology or suppress this technology. But what's the world doing, and what are they getting? What are they doing?
Well, let me give you one new number that I, in preparing to join you all today, I found, and it was a projection of the number of nuclear power plants we would need to generate the electricity to replace our fossil fuel programs. And they say 7 plus times the total number of amount of nuclear energy generated in the United States today. Mm-hmm. So they're saying
So we have 100 plants today, approximately.
So we're talking 700 to 1,000 new nuclear power plants.
At a certain size, of course,
That's worldwide, yeah.
No, this is United States.
To replace our coal burning, gas burning, and oil burning, which people are saying we want to clean up the pollution.
But let's go back to something that's a little more close to reality, because I think we all agree that's too much. China's building nuclear power plants as fast as they can get financing to do it, and as fast as they can get agreement for the technology transfers that will give them the capability to do all the building themselves. We have watched Westinghouse be bought by one Japanese group that used to be sort of an assistant small partner. We've seen General Electric Nuclear go to another Japanese firm.
So we're exporting
We've exported our technology. China historically has been very efficient, as has India and Japan, at getting technology transferred along with the sale of units.
The big picture is that according to the latest annual survey, which American Nuclear Society's magazine Nuclear News does every year, 32 countries around the world have nuclear power programs. So everybody else is pretty much shifting into high gear because they have looked at all the alternatives, and particularly China, who had to clean up their air for the Olympics, knows that they have a big problem with coal. And they want to replace coal, which is with nuclear power for generating electricity, which was the original reason Congress in this country authorized a nuclear power program, to replace coal. So, we're falling behind. And the perfect example about technology transfer is that the United Arab Republics are going to build nuclear power plants, and they're going to be built by South Korean firms. Where do you think the South Koreans got the technology and got their learning? From us, Well, that's not all bad, but we ought to be in the competitive mix rather than sort of on the sidelines and just getting started with a couple new nuclear power plants in this country right now.
Well, I think even our universities have cut back on their programs of training.
They have, but they're coming back.
Well, I think the reality, I think what we're talking about, the reality of energy issues, energy use, energy, trying to have as clean an energy source as possible, is forcing the hand.
I'd like to just be a little bit more upbeat about it, mainly because of maybe because some of my friends, Babcock and Wilcox is building what they call SMBR, right? Small
modular reactors. Yeah.
SMRs, small modular reactors, and they're developing those. And I have been happy to see several of my friends in the nuclear industry beginning to work on them, getting jobs at B&W and so forth. My feeling is that that kind of thing is America's really only hope for leapfrogging into the future, because basically the MOX fuel is being made all over the world. We're going to be Johnny-come-latelys on that. The thorium reactors are going in India. We're going to be Johnny-come-latelys on that. But hopefully, maybe B&W and some other companies can get these small modular reactors designed and built in America, and that would be terrific. So that's mine.
And what let's talk a little bit on the jobs follow a good energy source. I think, and business development follows a good, reliable energy source. And if that's our number one issue, is being competitive in the world, what do we have to do?
We have to rethink our whole way of looking at jobs and energy, I think. I mean, people seem to think that electricity comes from Santa Claus.
Or no, it comes from the switch in the wall there.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You
You didn't know that. It's there.
And the cost of it doesn't matter to anything, and it matters to a lot of things. I mean, there are people in small manufacturing companies in Vermont who have gotten up. I've heard them say, I spend $1 million a year in electricity. If the price raises, I don't know if I can keep my manufacturing in Vermont. And they're not.
Oh, this is common.
This is a reality of life. I think you began by talking about the opposition to the power line coming down through New Hampshire. And one of the unfortunate side effects of the environmental movement, which is correct, in concern about the environment, but some people have taken that to mean they're against everything. You know, no matter what it is, they're against it. If it's new or if it has some effect on the environment. And we need the political leadership to say that life is not that easy, and there is a balance. There are some trade-offs. We always have to look at cost and benefit and environmental usage.
Right. We could say that, you know, we only want our power from wind, and that we are also therefore willing, when the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining, that we won't use power. And if our pipes freeze at night, that I guess we'll just absorb that cost.
Or be burning wood, I guess.
Yeah.
Because we certainly don't want to use oil, you know, to heat our homes or propane. You know.
Speaking of home heating, one of the things that I find sort of annoying is, I mean, I have an oil tank in my basement. Everybody does. Most people do. But, you know, you could do geothermal ground source heating and get rid of that oil tank. But that takes electricity. Electricity actually can save us oil, not just in transportation, but in home heating. But that isn't really talked about very much, and I find it unfortunate.
But the capital investment involved
Is very high.
Is what really impacts that. Everything, unless the government's going to finance it all.
And we know the governments are pretty much on the broke side at this point.
That's true.
Well,
That's true.
That's what really bothers me today is they talk all these programs of subsidy, and they don't have any money unless they borrow it to subsidize. And the jobs follow low-cost, reliable energy.
And on that note, I want to thank Meredith Engman for coming, and Howard Schaefer, and Milt Eaton. And my name is Lynn Korm. I've been your host. And we want to thank you also for watching and bearing with us as we start our first show and begin this new series. Thank you again. We'll see you on our next show.